that stillness. If there are thoughts, simply observe those thoughts. And if you're becoming frustrated at not being able to observe your thoughts, observe that frustration. Whatever is arising in the mind, observe it. In this practice, as a beginner, the most common experience we have is we're constantly carried away. That some thought, emotion, memory comes up, before we know it, off we go on our story. So of course, if we notice we get carried away, the first approach, of course, is as with the earlier breath practice, simply relax, release grasping onto that thought, and return again to observing the mind. So just relax, release, return. Keep coming back again and again, observe the mind. And then as a beginner, if we find that we're constantly getting swept away, one thing that can help us is what I've mentioned before the meditation, is labeling or noting. Is give the mental event a name, because if you give it a name, it becomes an object. You're free of it. So keep it simple, like such as simply thought, memory, frustration, image. Keep it very simple. If you make it too elaborate, it'll just become commentary on commentary on commentary. Similar to this, there's another little tool we can use as a beginner to help avoid getting caught up so much, and you might like to experiment with this in the next meditation, and that is to anchor yourself in the breath. So again, if you find yourself constantly getting caught up and swept away, then go back to the breath. And you can go back to any variation of the breath practice you prefer. You can go back to the full body, the abdomen, nostrils, or the rhythm of the breath, whichever one you prefer. Go back to that, focus on that, stabilize your attention, and then in a little bit in the corner of your mind, start to notice your thoughts and emotions and memories. But mainly you're still focusing on the breath. So you're anchoring yourself in the breath, and that's going to help avoid getting caught up in those. So mainly focus on the breath, a little bit in the corner of the mind, noticing thoughts, emotions, and memories. And then slowly over time, shift more the focus on the thoughts, less on the breath, and eventually you can let go of the breath altogether. But you can anchor yourself in the breath to avoid getting swept up. So you may find that useful. You might like to experiment with that in the next meditation. And then, of course, if we're just always getting swept away, it can be very disheartening and think, well, I can't do this practice at all. Then we can as we looked at before, generate a thought, deliberately generate a thought. Because again, now, when something comes up in our mind, a thought, emotion, or memory, it doesn't announce itself. It just, there it is, and before we know it, off we go. Whereas if we generate a thought, we know it's coming, so then we can generate the thought and watch it as it arises and passes. If we're generating a thought, I wouldn't recommend generating any thought that has emotional charge to it, because you're just going to react to it. So keep the thought very simple and basic. Don't make it something pleasant or unpleasant. Just neutral. Some neutral, simple thought. And just watch that as it arises and passes. And then keep your attention right where it was and see what comes up next. And so you can keep doing this occasionally, and then you have a bit of feeling of success. Yes, I can do this a little bit. So that can be helpful. So that's the most common experience as a beginner, swept away. But there's another experience that is quite common as a beginner. That we sit down and we look and suddenly there's no thoughts. And usually that's not because suddenly our mind has become very quiet and still. The most common reason that happens is that our focus is too intense. Again, our strong habit is in daily life, if we want to focus on something, we tense. And here, particularly in this one, we know, or we feel like if I don't tense, I'm just going to get swept away. So really, in this practice, I mean, it's almost like this. It's like the bot. It's like, I've got to watch. So we're way too intense. So when our focus is intense, we're suffocating the mind. There's no space for anything to come up. So if we notice that our focus is very intense, a lot of tension in the body and mind, relax, 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 relax. So that's the most common reason. Another reason, of course, is that we're lacking clarity. And I think Alan Wallace mentioned this in one of the things I read earlier. Similar to, for example, when we start to focus at the entrance of the nostrils, often as a beginner we don't notice anything, no sensations. But that doesn't mean there's no sensations there, it's just because we don't have enough clarity to notice the subtle sensations. So similarly now our mind is very dull and not very clear, so the threshold of our consciousness is up here, which means we only notice the very coarse mental activity. There's a lot of mental activity going on down here, we're not noticing it. So if we simply improve our clarity without getting tense, the threshold will move down, we'll start to notice more and more subtle mental activity. And then another reason is we sit down and then we go, what's going on? There's no thoughts. My mind is always full of thinking, but now it's completely still. I must be doing something wrong here because now, I can't see anything. There's nothing there at all. This is all thoughts, no? So similarly, if you're getting frustrated, that's a mental event. Watch that. So whatever's arising in the mind, watch it. And then, of course, if there really is no thoughts there, that's not a time just to blank out. Is to observe that stillness. So we want the continuity of mindfulness. If there's thoughts, observing the thoughts. If there's no thoughts, observing that stillness, that space of the mind, that stillness of mind. So these are the two most common experiences we have as a beginner. One more thing I'd like to talk about before we go back to the practice again. And here I'll read from a text from a great 19th century Buddhist master, Tibetan Buddhist master, Dujung Lingpa. When he's talking about this particular practice we're doing, he says, loosely relax and watch your thoughts from afar, clearly observing whatever arises. That which observes is called mindfulness. That which is observed is called movement. And resting in that state is called stillness. So that's the practice for tomorrow, resting in that state of stillness. Identify them as such and meditate. If you meditate earnestly, stable meditative experiences of the bliss, luminosity and non-conceptuality of shamatha will arise in your mind stream. So here he says bliss, luminosity and non-conceptuality. So he's using the word luminosity, that's simply another word for clarity. So what you're going to notice in any shamatha practice, and certainly in this shamatha practice, is as you get deeper into the practice, you will start to notice these three qualities more and more. Sometimes in your meditation, your mind will seem crystal clear, a lot of clarity. Other times, your mind will become very quiet and still. In other words, non-conceptual, no activity. And at other times, your mind will become very joyful or blissful. Now, the meditation texts warn meditators about these three experiences because they're all very pleasant. And there's a great danger of becoming attached to them, particularly as a beginner. So if we start to have any of these experiences, often what happens is we go, oh, that's so nice, I like that, I want that. And we try and hold on to it. And of course, as soon as we do that, poof, it's gone. And then of course, we try to recreate it because it was so nice. And then of course, we can't recreate it, so we get frustrated. So therefore, and our practice will come to a grinding halt, because now we're simply shifting our craving and attachment from external things to internal things, and we're not doing the practice. So therefore, if these experiences come up in our practice, don't develop craving and attachment for them, because that's just the whole practice come to a grinding halt. Rather, use them as signposts that our practice is going in the good direction, and use those very experiences to go deeper into the practice, because those very experiences can help us to actually go much deeper into the practice. So that's one warning, not to have craving and attachment for them when they arise. The other warning is to not misinterpret these experiences, particularly the second one, the non-conceptuality, the stillness. It's very common for people, when they have this experience, to misinterpret this experience as some sort of transcendent realization of non-duality, because experientially it's quite similar. In this experience, there's no strong sense of subject-object duality. I think someone mentioned it in one of their comments yesterday, that there's no strong sense of me. There was sort of just the breath. So when this happens, of course, in Shamatha, or in this practice, in Shamatha practice, just goes quiet, it's very easy to misinterpret that and go, I'm realizing non-duality. I'm realizing the nature of reality. In fact, I'm very close to enlightenment. I'm sure of that. So, of course, then we become very delusional. So, simply an experience of stillness is not a realization of nature of reality. So we need to be aware of that, otherwise we can easily misinterpret. So, so these are three qualities that come up in Shamatha practice, and I want to talk a little bit more about the second one a little bit later today. It's particularly important, but that's enough for now. So what we'll do now then is we'll go back into this practice again. And so again, you may like to experiment, particularly if you're getting carried away a lot, you may like to try and experiment with this anchoring in the breath to see if it helps to avoid getting heavily distracted, and also taking note of the other points on the board here to help you get into the practice. Okay, so let's do the practice before we break for lunch. setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. And relaxing more deeply with each out-breath. Not dwelling in the past, not anticipating the future. In particular, letting go of any expectations for this meditation. And simply allow the mind to come to rest in the present moment. And simply become aware of the rhythm of your breath. Allowing the eyes to be at least partially open, resting your gaze in the space in front of you. And again, bring your attention to your own mind. Observe your own mind and whatever is arising in the space of the mind. Simply be like an impartial observer or witness observing thoughts and other mental events as they arise and pass, without grasping to them, without becoming distracted.